Hello, wrestling fans, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Obtuse Angles Wrestling Podcast with Kyle and Jeremy. Kyle, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Episode 2, very excited about this. Very excited about covering the angle that we're going to cover today, being Hogan versus Sting and Starrcade 1997.
Wow, a lackluster event, to say the least, man.
Well, you know, it's so interesting that we call it a lackluster event because the buy rate for this show was, I believe, a 1.9. I researched it earlier today, but that number might not mean anything to you, but the fact is it was WCW's biggest pay-per-view of all time. They never did business before or after that on pay-per-view that rivaled that buy rate.
Yeah, I mean, that's impressive considering that they didn't really give too much of a shit to give the fans something. It seems like, you know, if you're trying to do big business,
yeah,
and this is amidst the blazing Monday Night Wars of the 90s. This might have been the early part of it, I guess, of the Monday Night Wars.
It was actually about halfway through because the Monday Night Wars started in September of '95, and obviously it ended in early 2001. This was where WWF was getting ready to die. Basically.
Right.
I mean, this was when their numbers were at an all-time low. They turned the ship around very quickly in early 98, and by mid-98, they took off and never looked back. But, yeah, this was in the middle of the thing, man. And here's the thing. I think that this was WCW actually giving a shit, and this is what happened when they came out guns a-blazing. I mean, if you look at, and we're going to get all the way to Starrcade 97, but if you look at how big this show was. So Starrcade was basically the WrestleMania of WCW.
Absolutely, yeah.
Only a few months later, the WWF would produce WrestleMania 14 in March of 98. And if you look at those shows stacked up back to back, WWF eclipsed Starrcade in every single way.
Now, and that wasn't always the case, man, because if you look back, historically speaking, at Starrcade was, I mean, it was kind of the be-all, end-all in the days of, you know, the last dying days of the Crockett years.
Oh, yeah, man.
On into the Ted Turner acquisition of WCW. Starrcade was, as you said, it was basically the WrestleMania for World Championship Wrestling.
Starrcade, baby. Name invented by Dusty Rhodes. Starrcade.
Well, look at all the big events they had, man. I mean, you can remember, like, Flair and Race, you know, in the cage or whatever. And
absolutely, yeah.
Just all the brilliant things they did. And then you come into the late 80s where, you know, it seemed like Sting and Flair were headlined in every single pay-per-view. These awesome and amazing matches that just that really did really great business. And it seems like it seems like they really dropped the ball with it, Kyle.
Well, interestingly enough, when Eric Bischoff took the reins of the company in the mid-'90s, he de-emphasized Starrcade. So there were a couple of years there in the mid-'90s where Starrcade wasn't the biggest show of the year. That would have been Super Brawl because Bischoff loves Super Brawl. So if you go back, I mean, I believe 1 year the main event was Hogan versus Brutus the Beefcake. That match did not draw anything at Starrcade. In Starrcade 95, it was when worlds collide. It was like New Japan versus WCW, which for wrestling nerds like us is awesome.
Right,
because it gave us matches like Eddie Guerrero versus Utani, but it didn't do very well business-wise because, you know, if you're an American wrestling fan, if, as you know, Jim Cornette likes to say, Joe Sixpack just getting off from the Jiffy Lube, coming home, sucking back the beer, you're not going to be interested in, you know, Otani versus Guerrero or Jushin Thunder Liger.
That's right.
Versus
It really
whoever.
took the wrestling nerds to appreciate it because I think it was a wonderful idea, man. That pay-per-views like that where they basically pitted Japanese superstars against American superstars. It should have done way more business than it did. And it should have been appreciated more. But you're right. To the average wrestling fan, man, they just they weren't buying it, and you know, I don't know. It's really a sad event because it didn't really last that long. They didn't do that too often, did they?
Well, they didn't, and I think it was because the business did so poorly for Starrcade 95. But Starrcade 96, Bischoff began to take interest in Starrcade again, and we were given Hogan versus Rowdy Roddy Piper, which we'll get to. But first, in order to truly appreciate Starrcade 97 in all of its crappiness, let's go back to the inception of the angle. That was the NWO. Hogan, Hall, Nash. We're not going to cover all that. It's been done to death. Everybody knows. Bash at the Beach. 96. Now, Sting was the franchise player, as he's been called, and both on and off camera. He was the main star of WCW until Hulk Hogan comes into the company in 94, begins dominating everything.
Yeah, Sting was set to be the kind of like the the underdog story. He was going to be the guy. Him and I think Savage as well were kind of the ones who were supposed to stand up and fight the powers. Take down the big bully, the NWO. During this whole spiel here, and it seemed like it tended to work at first. Like I don't.
Oh, most definitely worked. I mean, well, the reason the NWO worked so much in the first place was because they were established as being so dominant early on. I mean,
right.
Bash at the Beach 96, NWO wins. NWO continues to win. Hulk Hogan defeated the Giant. The Giant had won the WCW World Championship a few months earlier, and Hogan beat the Giant in August of 1995 and would hold that title all the way until Starrcade 97, with the exception of about a 5-day reign for Lex Luger in the middle of 96. Hogan held that world title for a year and a half, which is why Starrcade 97, when he finally fought Sting, was going to be so important to the company. And it turned out being absolute shit.
It did, man. That match was what we in the business like to call the drizzling shit.
It was, and we're going to get to that. So, Sting is solidly behind WCW. He's on Team WCW at Bash at the Beach 96. He winds up losing alongside Macho Man Randy Savage and Lex Luger. That's fine. That was well done. So we go to Fall Brawl War Games 1996. Team WCW versus Team NWO. Great idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was set to do great business. And it's it's the Fall Brawl. It's the double ring with the double cage. And,
which why the hell has WWE never taken that idea?
I think it's a wonderful idea.
It's a wonderful idea.
I think Vince McMahon always kind of saw it as just too gimmicky. Like he saw it too much bells and whistles. And maybe that's why.
And Vince hates anything that's not his creation.
That is true. Now you look at what was it? Help me out here, Kyle. Was it Wrestle War? No, it was not Wrestle War. It was the 3-ring battle royal that they did.
World War III.
World War III.
Yeah.
I think that was a wonderful idea that can still be done. I mean, it's
God, I don't know, man. As a kid, I loved World War III. It's almost like a child came up with the idea of World War III because it was like somebody looked at the Royal Rumble and they went, well, shit, that's a great match, and they got 30 people. If we put 60 people in there, it'd be twice as good. You know what I mean? But the problem with World War III was that you had 3 rings, which on paper is awesome, but all 60 guys came out at once. It wasn't like the Rumble where every 90 seconds a new dude enters the ring.
Right, and the same thing is, looking at it like that, it's a really, really difficult event to watch from home.
Well,
because
it is.
No matter how many cameras you have and no matter how many split screens you use, it really is hard to keep up with the action. It's one of those events that it seems like if you're not watching it front row, then it just really isn't worth.
Well, and they had the 3 screens at once, and that's cool. But back in 95,
you were watching it on a 19-inch color TV.
Yeah, the aspect ratio wasn't what it is today, so you're kind of squinting. And it's like, is that Barry Darsow fighting Jericho or Booker T fighting Funaki? I can't tell. So yeah, but again, so World War III, I'm personally happy that was never ripped off. It'd be great if War Games was. War Games 1996. Now the build up to this was the NWO was making fans and WCW think that Sting was secretly a part of the NWO.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that a bit because I think that was a wonderful idea. I think it was a wonderful idea that was poorly executed. And let me explain why I think it was poorly executed. You had now this guy, I never knew who he was. It seems like I would have found out who was the guy that was the fake Sting.
Fake Sting was a guy who wrestled under the name of Cobra. You remember Craig Pitbull Pittman?
Yes.
He was a former Marine, decent wrestler, decent character, managed by Teddy Long. They did this angle where Cobra was his old buddy and they hated each other and they fought. Nobody really cared. I think it might have main evented a WCW Pro on a Saturday morning back in the day.
Right.
So Cobra kind of vanishes, but he's still under contract, and they begin painting Cobra up to look like Sting. So much so that fake Sting became a character, or he became a wrestler.
Yeah.
I remember if you were to get the old N64 game, WCW versus NWO World Tour, fake Sting was a playable character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was a wonderful idea, poorly executed. And I think the center of it, I think the person that I blame when I went back and kind of watched and to kind of refresh my memory, I think Lex Luger was to blame for it. If you look at Fall Brawl, you had Lex Luger, Arn Anderson, and Ric Flair.
Yeah, it was basically where the Heel Horsemen joined the babyface Sting and Luger, and they came together as a show of unity to put over how important this feud was.
Right, and they kind of come up as the face of WCW in the WCW versus NWO angle.
Absolutely.
And you got Sting saying, "Oh, these atrocities aren't being performed by me. I promise it wasn't me." Blah blah blah. And I think that was really cool. That was a really cool angle.
It was.
And I blame Luger because I go back and I look at some of the promos, Kyle, and they're just really painful to watch. Now, Ric Flair is an amazing performer in all aspects of wrestling. Brilliant. In my opinion, for the money, the best promo man that has ever been.
Of all time. A million people have called him the best all-around package.
Absolutely. And you've got Arn Anderson, who's not too shabby on a microphone as well.
No, sir.
And then you've got Luger, and I've watched some of these promos, Kyle.
Have you seen the one where he tries to rip his shirt off, but he can't?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't even know where I'm at right now. That was for an indie show. Go look that up on YouTube. Lex Luger versus Shirt. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think that might have been the tail end. That was the tail end, of Lex Luger's career. Where he was somaed out. And it was an ugly, horrible, horrible atrocity. So you got Flair and you got Arn Anderson, who are wonderful on a mic. They're great actors as well as great performers in ring. And then you have this caveman, Lex Luger, who, and you go back and look at some of these promos, and Arn Anderson's selling it perfectly. Ric Flair's selling it perfectly.
And Luger
fake Sting thing
can't even get the words out of his mouth.
I have seen better acting in a Mexican soap opera than the shit that just came out of Lex Luger's face. It was really hard to sell it. I mean, if you go back
that came out of his face.
If you go back and look at the actual promo that they cut before, right before the match at Super Brawl, the big main event. Luger his hair's disheveled. He looks like he's on God knows what.
He might have been somaed out then. We don't know.
He might have been. And Sting comes busting into the promo saying, "It wasn't me. You're going to find out. I promise. I had nothing to do with this."
Right.
And Luger's just like, "Yeah, I think it was you." It was just some of the most stilted, horrible performance I've ever seen.
Yeah, Luger was always terrible on the microphone. So much so that I don't think he gets enough crap for how bad he was.
Right.
I think it was overlooked, how terrible of a promo man he was. I mean, decent in the ring, amazing body. I'd fuck him. That's what I'm saying. But he wasn't good. He wasn't good on the mic. So again, NWO is making the fans and the announcers and WCW think that Sting is the one who's beating down Luger and beating down Flair and Anderson every week because they have Cobra dressed up as Sting. There was the angle on I think it was the Nitro before Fall Brawl 96 where there was a limousine and the door was open and they played back Sting's voice as if it was coming out of the limo and it suckered Luger into walking over and he gets beaten down. So Fall Brawl 96 happens. War Games 4-on-4. And everybody's going, so Sting is going to side with the NWO because I believe the NWO had 3 guys on their team and the 4th man wasn't announced yet.
And this was before NWO, or I should say Eric Bischoff. Let's be honest. Let's be real. Before Eric Bischoff started getting his grubby hands on every single piece of huge talent in the world.
Absolutely.
You look at NWO, man, they just started bringing in basically all of Hulk Hogan's friends, and then they just started buying talent left and right. The pockets were really deep there. And, still, they still managed to produce piss poor television.
They did.
But that's all a matter of opinion, and that's still to come. But you got that, and I think it's such a wonderful angle. It really was. The whole fake Sting thing, it was a good swerve. It's just horribly executed, and let's be honest. I mean, I jest, but you can't really blame the whole thing on Luger. I mean, I think there were other forces that kind of kept it from really being performing at the highest level and doing the best business it could.
And honestly, I think for a while it was fine at the time. Fall Brawl 96 happens. Sting comes into the ring. Everybody thinks that Sting is going to side with the NWO. He doesn't. Sting single-handedly takes out all 3 members of the NWO.
Right.
So Sting does his whole deal and then he flips off Luger and he says, "Is that good enough proof for you?
Right.
I'm not part of the NWO." And then rather than finishing the match and letting WCW win, Sting leaves. NWO gets a 4th member. It's now 4-on-3. WCW's disadvantage.
Yes.
And then the NWO wins the match because WCW can't overcome the numbers game.
Right.
That would be the last match that Sting would wrestle until Starrcade 97. He went on tour in Japan for a little while, wrestled Steven Regal, but he was never on WCW TV in a match until Starrcade 97.
Now, when does he show back up? He shows back up and starts doing the I'm very crow-like and I hang out in the rafters and watch stuff.
He comes back the next night on Nitro. He cuts a promo basically saying, "I'm so upset that the fans didn't believe in me. The WCW didn't believe in me. Nobody believed in me. As far as I'm concerned, Sting is a free agent."
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. That's the last promo you would get from Sting for almost a year, right?
You're right about that. Yeah, I think he might have cut one more promo
He
couple
said,
of weeks
"Hogan,
later.
you're a dead man."
Yeah.
That was the only line you got from Sting for like an entire year. A brilliant promo man who's not doing promos.
It was great. Well, but it's fine. And here's the thing, man. Starrcade 97 was a bad show, but the build-up to it was amazing.
Absolutely.
There's a reason it had the highest buy rate of any pay-per-view in WCW history, was because Eric Bischoff, for all of his faults, helped craft a storyline that was the ultimate slow burn, that made you want it. Because for the longest time, you didn't know, because Sting changed his whole outlook, or his whole outlook, but his whole look. He was growing his hair out already, but it grew out even longer. He adopted the crow makeup. It was black and white, and the announcers would say things like, "Oh my God, black and white face paint. Does that mean that he's NWO? We don't know,
And you're right. It was the perfect slow burn angle, and you can liken it to, now let's say you have sex with the woman of your dreams.
Sure.
And then
Rhea Perlman.
And
mm-hmm.
Yeah, Roseanne Barr. But
Yeah.
We're getting way too personal here.
Yeah.
You're making love, and it's this beautiful, wonderful thing, and that's what this angle was to build over the course of that year.
You're right.
You're making love to this beautiful creature,
Mm-hmm.
and then right before that moment of fruition,
Yeah.
She jumps off of you and grabs her clothes and takes off running, and that's pretty much what Starrcade was. Starrcade was this huge build-up that basically came to. Like that was pretty much the end of it.
Starrcade was a wonderful build-up that left all the fans with blue balls. That's what happened. We all got blue balls waiting to come when Sting won the world title. So
that's right.
So for a number of months, Sting shows up in the rafters. He doesn't say a word. He has the face paint. There's speculation on whose side is he on. And Hogan, meanwhile, is dominant. As I said, he won the world title in August of 96 from the Giant, and he goes on. And he wrestles Roddy Piper at Starrcade 96. Piper wins, but we would later find out in the ultimate bait and switch that Piper, who drew up the contract for the match himself, didn't want to win the world title. It was non-title, so Piper doesn't win, meaning that, again, Hogan retains the championship.
Yeah, it all made perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing, and maybe we can do a whole episode on this, and let's not spend too long on it, is that in the build-up to Piper and Hogan in 96, they needed to create a reason in their mind for some reason for this match to happen. And they played a music video from like 1992 of Roddy Piper. Do you remember this?
Vaguely, yes.
And in the video, really quickly, on the side of a stadium, it says, Roddy Piper versus Hogan tonight, right? So they played this awful music video, and then Eric Bischoff, who's a commentator at the time, or it might have been Tony Schiavone, they freeze frame it, and they go, "You see right there? Maybe the answers are in the music videotape. Maybe Piper was trying to tell us something."
And at that point, they had grabbed the spoon at that point and started
yeah.
feeding you the angle, like, in case you're not getting this, we want to be perfectly clear. This is the business we're trying to do here.
So Hogan wins, and again, like I said, aside from like one very short title reign by Luger, he won it on a Nitro, then lost it 6 days later at a pay-per-view. Hogan is dominant. So the fans are waiting because, there's screw job after screw job, and Hogan prevails, and Hogan retains, and
Boy,
finally...
they loved, man. They rode that. They beat that horse to death.
Oh, I know they did.
Thing.
But, and they did, and it wound up killing the company partially, but they did it so well in 97. So, week after week, Sting does his thing, and then finally Sting lets J.J. Dillon know that he wants to face Hogan because Sting points to a fan sign in the front row that says Hulk Hogan because J.J. Dillon kept trying to offer Sting contract after contract to fight this guy in the NWO and this guy in the NWO, and Sting kept turning him down. And finally, they signed the match, and it's going to be taking place at Starrcade 97. And again, now we're finally here to the pay-per-view that was so terrible.
It was, man.
Did you?
Just awful. I did. I had a chance to watch all the way through it.
Yeah, you know what?
I did. And Malenko and Guerrero put on an amazing match. I mean, anytime you put those guys in there, and there was a few others. I mean, don't get me wrong. Malenko and Guerrero was a beautiful match. Now, I don't think it could possibly do the business on the same level, or have the same level of performance as back at Super Brawl that you saw from Scott Norton and Ice Train.
Of course, man.
Well, I mean, was it Fall Brawl or Super Brawl? It was Super Brawl, right? 96.
Yeah.
When we were talking,
Super
Fall Brawl.
I think it might have been. Well, usually it was Fall Brawl was the War Games.
It was Fall Brawl. And I watched that Scott Norton and Ice Train match, man, and that was just a train wreck. It was an ice train wreck.
It was an ice train wreck. Fire and ice, baby.
But you also had Super Calo versus Rey Mysterio, which was good.
Hey, man, I love Super Calo. I still don't know what the hell that gimmick was, but it doesn't matter.
No idea. He had sunglasses that were built into his hood, which I thought was brilliant. And then, of course, you had Conan versus Juventud Guerrero, which was a wonderful match.
Oh, I mean, any combination of those guys was fantastic. Look, this show from a creative standpoint was horrible, but there were some good spots on it, no doubt.
Sure.
It's kind of like saying that, hey, to their credit, the Nazis were one of the first regime that tried to warn the public about the dangers of smoking. This show was the Nazis, but...
Every cloud has a silver lining.
Exactly, right. The show starts off, amazing video package, Sting, and this is back in the time before anybody really did a whole lot of video packages.
Right.
So, Sting steps on a picture of Hogan. They start, the bell, the pyro. Oh, my God, it's finally here. MCI Center, Washington, D.C., Starrcade. Man, this is the night.
Right. It's one of those things that when you look back on it, it's a little cheeseball. But at the time, and you do that with movies, too. Like, you watch them and be like, oh, my God, like, this was entertainment at the time or something?
Independence Day was the best movie ever.
But when you go back and look at that, if you try to watch these pay-per-views, like Starrcade 97, if you try to watch it from the standpoint of where you were and who you were at that time, it really was. They really did kind of set the table to be a really wonderful event.
They did, man.
They opened up with, like I said, Malenko versus Guerrero,
and that was a spectacular match.
Always,
and that match also sowed the seed for later on because Dean Malenko lost that match, and he would go on a pay-per-view losing streak for a long time that would build to Malenko versus Jericho.
Right. Yes.
So I mean, it that showed some foresight, or maybe there was no foresight and it was happenstance. But either way, it led on to bigger and better things. The second match of the night seemed like filler to me. It was Scott Norton, Vincent, and Randy Savage versus the Steiner brothers and Ray Traylor, who we all know and love as.
It seems almost like
the
old indie show stigma, where they book an entire card, but they only have 8 workers on the card.
Yeah.
So you got a singles match on first.
Yeah.
You have a singles match on second, and then you have the 2 heels and the 2 faces from the first 2 match come back and do a tag on third.
Oh yeah, well or you do the deal where. It's babyface and heel, and then the babyface's friend comes out and the heel interrupts, and then it's like, the referee has made this a tag team match. Oh, God. And then at the end of the show, you got the battle royal with all the other guys who have been on the show before, so that pads down a little bit more. Maybe have a talk segment with the guys in the battle royal beforehand.
Almost every single indie show that I ever worked back in the day was pretty much had that kind of layout to it.
Oh, yeah.
And what's wonderful is that the underneath guys, the undercard guys, the ones who came out and did a single and then did a tag, or did a single and then later did a battle royal, made $15. And then, of course, the booker, the promoter, was in the main event.
Of course he was.
And he took the largest cut. But you did it because you loved wrestling. Just
Bro.
like we do this show because we love wrestling.
Bro, I tell you this. I worked a show. This is down in this is in Barberville. I'm not going to say the guy's name, but
I know who it was.
you know who it was?
I do, yes.
And the promoter was an old man, and his son was one of the stars of the promotion.
Now, how does that work?
I don't know. It's
That almost
crazy.
never happens on the indie circuit.
And he comes to me. He comes to me the first show that I worked for him, and he says, listen, if I don't wrestle my boy in the first show, if I don't wrestle my boy in the first match of the show, in the middle of the show, and in the main event of every single show, the people leave. They get. He believed it. I swear to God, he believed it, man.
You know, it's you hear stories about people who
my
swallow their
God.
own hype, but when you see it firsthand, it's like looking into to the crystal ball and seeing your own future. Like you're just
Well,
like, is this happening right now?
I can't say if this story is true or not, but I believe it, and a lot of it's because I want to. One of my buddies worked that show with me, and then I worked 2 more shows for that promotion. I left, thank God. So my buddy, who's also a worker, goes down and wrestles in that promotion about a year later, and he says there are so few people there that the show starts. The 2 workers, they lock up, they do a couple of spots. The heel rolls outside of the ring, jumps over the barricade, sits down in a chair next to one of the guys in the crowd, one of the 4 people, and goes, so I heard that you had a lawnmower for sale. Is that true, man? and they start talking about buying a lawnmower in the middle of the match because there's so few people there.
That's one of those shows where you go out there and bust your ass and make your $10, and all you're wrestling in front of is the other workers' group.
Oh,
friends.
bro, $10 is more than I almost ever made. I have left shows with negative money, and I'm not talking about the gas and the food. I'm talking about the promoter going, hey, brother, you got some money for the
Can I borrow $20?
No, yeah. No, I had one. This is the promoter, and it wasn't that one. It was another show. He goes, hey, brother, can I have some cash for the kerosene heater? Because they lit the building with a kerosene heater. Oh, yeah, sure. Give him the money. And he's like, I'll pay you back, and I'll give you a payout, too. None of that. None of that. Negative money.
When I was 18 years old, and it'll remain nameless, I actually did 25 minutes Broadway.
Wow.
25 minutes Broadway at 18 years old.
I bet that was terrible.
And
I bet it was terrible.
it was horrible because there was about 22 people in the crowd.
Uh-huh.
I did 25 minutes Broadway, and I got paid in chili cheese fries and a jalapeno burger
Dude, but
from
you know
the
what?
concession stand, and that was still, hands down, the best payoff I ever received in professional wrestling.
Well, I tell you how bad my wrestling career was. When you said 22 people, I went, damn, that's a good house. I'm not kidding in my head. I'm not joking. In my head, I went, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Yeah, man. Well, they screamed like 25 people. I got to tell you, they cheered like 25.
So getting back to Starrcade 97, I'm loving it. I'm loving sharing these horrible. We should just have an episode way down the road where we just tell our own horrible
I think so, man.
wrestling
I think
stories.
that's in the future.
So the Steiner brothers and Ray Traylor are beaten by the heels, the NWO, Scott Norton, Vincent, and Randy Savage. So again, this is the big blow-off show. This is the show that for a year and a half they've been building to. This is the one where WCW really made you believe that this was the night that the NWO was getting their comeuppance. It was happening.
Yeah.
And the NWO wins the first one. So, I mean, you know what? That's fine, though. That's fine. I understand that the baby faces can't go over every match. I understand that. Sure. Match number 3. Goldberg beats Steve Mongo McMichael. Terrible match. Absolutely horrible. This is before WCW really, I think, knew what they wanted to do with Bill Goldberg. It
was very early because they kind of made a decision on Goldberg pretty quickly that he was going to be this force to be reckoned with. But there was the very beginning there when they were still confused on what exactly to do with this behemoth.
Oh yeah, well, and you know, according to wrestling folklore, when WCW brought Bill Goldberg in, he's this big, physically imposing guy, spectacular look, former Atlanta Falcon. They thought that they were going to show WWE how to do a shoot fighter. He was going to be their version of Ken Shamrock.
Wow.
Which is why when you watch the match, Goldberg, hits a couple of cool submission moves. Yeah. And, of course, Steve Mongo McMichael leading that match. I mean, Ricky Steamboat, eat your heart out.
Right. Now, the only match that I could ever imagine actually being worse than Mongo McMichael and Bill Goldberg, The only thing I could think that could possibly be worse than that would maybe like Jumpin' Jeff Farmer versus Rajah Lyon. That's the only thing I can think that, and this was on a pay-per-view. I don't understand.
No, this was on their WrestleMania. This was on their biggest.
Not just any pay-per-view. It was their the pay-per-view, the be-all, end-all.
The biggest pay-per-view end-all be-all.
Right.
But again, though, I'm okay. We're still talking undercard here. The match realistically should have been 90 seconds. Instead, it was 5 minutes and 59 seconds.
Ugh.
The most contrived, shitty table spot I have ever seen in the history of professional wrestling.
Well, that's what you get, man. If you put Goldberg, he's going to run in, he's going to lock up, he's going to throw some punches and kicks, and then he's going to get lost. So that covers 25 seconds. So then basically you've still got 5 minutes of two guys who are just pushing each other into the corner and punching and kicking because they're lost.
Exactly. Match number 4, Saturn versus Chris Benoit. Saturn defeats Chris Benoit. Now, I got to tell you, this match I absolutely loved. 10 minutes and 50 seconds, a spectacular match. I thought it was incredible, but there was a big problem, and this is indicative of the entire show. I am the biggest Chris Benoit fan of all time, and of course I'm talking about the Murderers. Love him. No, no. He was spectacular in the ring, and whatever he did in the last days, which was absolutely treacherous and horrible, you have to admit that before his final days, he was one of the greatest in-ring performers of all time.
Absolutely. He kind of paved the way for workers who were developed and brilliant in the ring who might not have had the best microphones.
Oh, sure, man.
Because let's face it, say what you will about Benoit, wonderful in-ring performer, a great look. That dude was just carved out of stone.
Carved out of stone, dude.
Worst promo, man, I think I've ever heard. And what's sad is that he eventually, at one point, joins up with a group, a stable, if you will, who is notorious for being some of the best promos ever given, the Four Horsemen.
Oh,
and you would watch those days, man. It was so funny. Even back then, I was still about a year out from breaking into the business, and I can remember even as a mark, before I was smart and, to a point.
Sure.
I would watch those promos, and Flair would get on and kill. Arn Anderson would get on and kill. And, whomever would get on and kill, and then they passed the mic to Benoit, and he would just go, I agree.
Yeah, well, at least he knew his limitations.
He knew that he was kind of crappy on the microphone.
Well, in this match, he even cuts a promo on Raven, and he delivers this soliloquy, or as Dusty Rhodes would call this soliloquy here, baby.
A lot of THs.
Yeah, soliloquy, and it was absolutely horrible, but I'm one of the biggest Benoit fans of all time. That's why I have a DVD set of this feud with Raven and the Flock.
Sure.
And it went on for fucking ever. And for a long time, it was actually really good. It apparently isn't very notable because I tried to, or notable to a lot of people, because I tried to go onto Wikipedia and look up both Raven and the Flock and Benoit's feud with each other. Not even mentioned, but they feuded forever. So basically, out of memory, what happened was Benoit kept trying to wrestle Raven. Raven, because he had that kayfabe contract with WCW that dictated that he wrestled when he wanted, whenever he wanted, however he wanted. Right before the match would start, he would substitute in another member of the Flock.
He would step aside and let the cronies come in and do his work for him.
And it's a great storyline.
Wonderful heel angle.
Great. And Benoit every week would dismantle, Sick Boy or Kidman or Lodi or whoever, right?
Right.
So on the WCW Saturday night before Starrcade, finally you get this feud, or you get this match with, you get Benoit and Saturn. Benoit takes out Saturn. Saturn is Raven's number 2 man. You go, oh God, that's telling me Benoit's taking out everybody. It's Starrcade, Benoit versus Raven. It's finally happening. I cannot wait.
Right. Exactly. There was no one left.
No one left.
He had climbed the ladder. He had cleared out all the cronies. And at this time, they had been building that for a while, and you were just dying, man. And you could not wait to see Benoit get his hands on Raven.
You couldn't, and they even weaved DDP in there for a while before they had a 3-way. So they finally do it, and then it's Saturn. It's Saturn again. The day after it happened, he wrestled Saturn again.
Right.
Great match, spectacular
Yeah, don't get
match.
me wrong. There was a time in Saturn's career when he wasn't punching people's teeth out and throwing them over the top rope onto their fucking head into the concrete. That there was a time when Saturn actually went out there and earned his paycheck and did really well, man. He's a great in-ring performer.
Amazing match, man. One of the most underrated wrestlers of the 90s in my mind, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
I mean, they had the psychology in that match where Saturn works on the neck of Benoit, and even the announcers couldn't figure out why, because the rings of Saturn, is a move based on the arm, right?
Yeah, they thought it was the back he should have been working on, but actually focuses on the neck.
But the reason that he did that was because Raven got in there, hit the even flow DDT 1, 2, 3. It was great.
Which is weird because the commentator should have been selling that. The rings of Saturn, he's working on the neck, definitely setting up, to slap on that rings of Saturn, and they're just like, we're not sure why he's working on this body. It's fine.
That's why I love the honesty of Tony Schiavone.
It doesn't get much better when it comes to commentating. I mean, my list goes like this: Gordon Soley, and then Tony Schiavone right underneath him. That's really it.
That truly might have been the greatest list in the history of our sport.
Hands down, brother.
Number 5 match of the show. Buff Bagwell defeats Lex Luger. 16-minute match. 16-minute match for Bagwell and Luger. I'm watching this thing on the network, and this is the first time I've seen this pay-per-view in years. And on the network, on the bottom of the screen, it has icons, and it shows you where a match begins and where it ends.
Yes.
And the longest icon, the longest space in between those two dots was Bagwell and Luger. And I'm thinking, oh well, surely somebody fucked up. There's no way.
There's no way these guys are going 16 minutes.
They gave these guys they gave them that much time.
All I can say is that Bagwell better have earned that cheese fries and jalapeno burger.
I hope they paid him in that. I really do. So, Bagwell wins. Honestly, I just watched it this morning. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
And nobody cares. So we're going to move on. Number 6 match. Now we're down to the big 3. Well, hold on. Let me back up, because some other stuff happened before the last 3 matches of the show. Kevin Nash was supposed to wrestle the Giant. That was the second most promoted match on the show.
Right.
That was one of the big pillars
and probably
of the show.
The third worst match on the show. Or what would have been the third worst match on the show.
Oh, it would have been horrible.
Yeah.
That day, Kevin Nash calls WCW and tells them that he had a heart attack. Now, you heard that correctly. Now, Kevin Nash, in fact, did not have a heart attack.
I don't think so.
To this day, he defends that by saying that his father had a heart attack. He was paranoid over it, and that's why he did it. I'm fairly certain he did not want to job to the Giant.
He didn't see that in his future.
Instead, we were treated to a promo by young Scott Hall, who hit the ring and made fun of the Giant. The Giant comes out. He gives him a big slam. I guess
because in everyone's book, if you can't get Giant versus Kevin Nash, everybody knows the next best thing is a Scott Hall promo.
Yes. Mm-hmm. No, Scott Hall was a great talker. Didn't really achieve the same thing, I would think. Kevin Nash, by the way, one of the greatest, maybe I will say this, the greatest excuse man of all time.
Yeah, because in that business, you've got mic men, you've got in-ring performers, and you've got excuse men.
And Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash did. Well, Kevin Nash was temporarily, for a very short time, fired from TNA years later when he refused to do a job to, I believe, Austin Aries, because he said that his excuse at that point, and again, this is 2000s in TNA, Nash said that he moved his son's toy box but didn't realize there were weights in it, and he threw his back out.
Wow.
As far as creativity goes, I got to say this, that's one I've never heard before.
And I got to say that if any of you out there listening actually buy that excuse, I have a bridge I would love to sell you.
Really?
Yeah, it's in New York.
Uh-huh.
I think it's called the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh.
Anyway, I got it from some kind of inheritance or something, but I'm looking to get rid of it. So if you're buying any Kevin Nash excuse, I've got a bridge real cheap.
And if you'd like to buy that bridge from Jeremy, I think it would go spectacularly over some swampland I have for sale, too.
Absolutely.
Number 6 match in the show, DDP versus Kurt Hennig. A very good match. I enjoyed it. I thought it was the perfect length, 10 minutes, 52 seconds. This is where they finally began to turn the heat up. And after having Buff Bagwell, the heel, beat Lex Luger earlier in the night, Chris Benoit lose to Saturn, Goldberg fight Michael in a match nobody gave two shits about. This is where they threw you your first bone when DDP beats Kurt Hennig for the U.S. Championship.
Yeah. And a great match, too. I mean, it really was.
It was a great match.
Yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of the, they didn't have 10 minutes of get heat with the crowd and these little, false starts and whatnot. So they went out there and they just they collided, and it was a wonderful match.
And Kurt Hennig, I think, is a very underrated wrestler for that period of his career. A lot of people, give Kurt Hennig all the accolades that he so richly deserves.
Absolutely.
For earlier in his career, but he was a hell of a worker in WCW.
Absolutely.
He was a hell of a worker, and it was a great match with DDP.
He was kind of looked over because they didn't really seem to do. I mean, he had the title run with the but it seems. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just a big Hennig fan, and I think he deserves way more than he ever got.
I think the roster was so stacked, so ridiculously stacked at that point, that you could have a Kurt Hennig and just not use him. You know what I mean? So we move on to the 7th match of the show. Larry Zbyszko defeats Eric Bischoff by some sort of disqualification, we assume. Wow. The reason I say we assume is because it was never really said. We could almost do an entire induction on this in the first place. This match was officiated by Bret Hart. This was Bret Hart's big entrance into WCW, and this was going to show where his allegiance lie. Would he side with the NWO or WCW?
That wouldn't be the last time you saw Bret Hart that night either.
It would not, unfortunately. No. So the backstory of this match is obviously Bischoff and Zbyszko are feuding for a long time. WCW. Now the outcome of this match was also going to determine which direction Nitro went with, because if Bischoff won, it was going to become NWO Nitro, right. And if Zbyszko won, it would stay WCW Nitro. And apparently the plan was originally for Zbyszko to lose, and they were going to make NWO Nitro the show, and then WCW would retreat to Thunder, their big new show on TBS on Thursdays.
I see no way that could work out. I really, really have no idea where they were going to go with that.
They had a dry run. They had an NWO Nitro a couple of weeks earlier.
Well, the company actually would kind of become. Now, I don't really think on paper, but for the sake of the show, the company would eventually become WCW/NWO.
Yeah, well, creatively, right? Because whenever you bought any action figure, I remember, or any piece of merchandise on the tag, it would say WCW/NWO.
And on the pay-per-views, WCW/NWO presents Uncensored.
Yeah, no, it did.
Whatever it may be.
For a long, long time. A couple of weeks before that, they had this big, long segment on Nitro, where the NWO chased the WCW announcers off of the desk. They had all of these guys come in and systematically dismantle physically the WCW set. They put a big NWO logo in the middle. They even produced an intro for NWO Nitro. I remember this, and this was supposed to be the litmus test for NWO Nitro, which would have happened the following Monday after Starrcade. And I remember, they dropped all of these banners from the ceiling that said NWO. I remember Buff Bagwell walks up to the cameraman filming him and goes, "Are you WCW?" And the camera shakes back and forth as if the cameraman were the head of the lens. Right. And he goes, "Are you NWO?" And the camera nods. It goes, "That's what I thought." Which, speaking of Buff Bagwell riffing, Bagwell had a wonderful line earlier in the night when he wrestled Lex Luger. He looks at the camera and goes, "Instead of Lex Luger, he's Lex Loser."
I don't know why he's not doing stand-up.
I don't either. And then Tony goes, "Well, how creative." So
it's bad. You delivered a bad punchline when Tony Schiavone is giving you shit from the booth. He's like, "Yeah, that was."
So they do this deal on Nitro a couple of weeks before Starrcade. And I mean, I'm talking, this segment was like half an hour, maybe 40 minutes of them literally building a set. No matches, no nothing. I remember as a kid, I loved it because it was creative. It was something you had never seen before. It was spectacular. And WCW was kicking Raw's ass so hard in the ratings.
You could suspend disbelief, like, oh my God, this product that I love, these people are taking it over. And it worked. I think in its own way. It worked and it didn't work in other ways.
Right. Well, they were kicking the WWF's ass so hard that they could literally have a segment where they were building a set and beat Raw in the ratings.
They still did, yeah.
And they did. That being said, though, the numbers were so bad on that one segment that Raw, and when I say bad, I mean they were still amazing numbers, but comparatively to what they were, Raw came closer to beating WCW in the segment of that show than they ever had, which was why they put a kibosh on the deal. Zbyszko wins the match. Now, the end of this match, and you watched this recently too, Scott Hall puts a steel plate into Eric Bischoff's boot.
Oh, my God.
He kicks Zbyszko in the face. Pew! And it shoots out into the crowd.
Before it even makes contact with his head, and he sells it.
Oh, yeah.
He sells the metal plate that wasn't there.
Yeah.
He sells the shit out of it. Goes flat out. Boom.
Oh, yeah.
Falls asleep right there in the middle of the ring. And it was the plate wasn't even in it.
One time in a match as a heel, I won one of very few victories I ever had, I might add. I hit a guy in the head with a cowbell, but it shot out of my hand right before, and it goes over the referee's head. And my friend, my heel running partner at the time, who has the referee distracted. So the referee's back is to me. My buddy's on the apron. The cowbell goes over the ref's head, and then my buddy reaches up and grabs it like New York Yankee style and puts it behind his back. It was amazing. The opposite of the steel plate shooting out of Eric Bischoff's boot at the time.
He did. Zbyszko sold the shit out of it.
He sold the shit out of it, yeah. And it was the booking was very murky because you couldn't tell if Bret Hart was supposed to be on Bischoff's side when he was officiating this match or if he was just calling it down the middle. The announcers couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, great storytelling when you can't really tell.
When you don't know when on the blue fuck is happening. Right. So Bret Hart begins to beat up Eric Bischoff at this point. Scott Hall comes in. Bret Hart kicks Scott Hall's ass, and then he just raises Zbyszko's hand. Right. He doesn't call for the bell. He doesn't roll anybody on top of him. 1, 2, 3. He just raises Zbyszko's hand. Then the match is over, and they go, okay, well, I guess the winner was Larry Zbyszko then.
Well, didn't you listen in the stipulations when the announcer announced it? He said, no fall to a finish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He didn't. It wasn't a one fall to a finish.
No fall to a finish. So that match happens. That takes us to the main event.
We're here.
The main event, Sting against Hollywood Hogan, 12 minutes, 53 seconds. This is the match that they have been building up to for a year and a half. And I don't even have a problem with the match being relatively short.
Let me correct you there, Kyle, and you know how I hate to correct.
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
Let's say this was the wet fart that they were building up to.
Mm-hmm. The wet.
Let's call it what it is.
It was.
The whole event could be called a wet fart, but the main event was really just this amazing orgasmic build up to just a soggy fart.
It was. Well, it was kind of like, I don't even want to call it a soggy fart. Have you ever had one of those farts where like a whole big pebble of shit shoots out your ass?
Yeah, they're nuggety.
Yes, that's basically what it was.
Speaking of farts, and I hate to stop this train that we're on right now, but I got to tell you about my new couch.
Okay.
We got a leather couch. We just got moved into our new place, the new studio, the new apartment, and everything.
Very nice.
We bought a new sofa, and I've never owned a leather sofa before.
Mm-hmm.
I like them a lot. The only problem is I fart a lot. I'm what you would describe as farty.
Mm-hmm. Very farty.
Very much.
The farty boys, yeah.
And every sofa I've ever owned has been cloth. Now, when you fart into this cloth sofa, the gas dispenses into the cushions, and it's nice.
Spectacular.
Now, let me tell you what's wrong with this leather sofa.
Okay.
Every time I fart on it, the fart will not dispense into the cushions. It slides out it's almost like on a pneumatic tube system. When I fart, it slides out underneath my taint, and it has to dispense itself around my balls. So every time I fart, it comes out the front between my legs.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, my balls smell like farts all the time when I'm around the house.
Oh, God.
Do you know how hard it is to get your woman to show you any attention at all when your balls smell like farts?
Especially if you're a man who loves having those balls sucked on.
I do.
As I'm sure we all do.
Much.
Absolutely.
I love it so much. And I know the mood's kind of changed on the show right now. And
I
hate
feel
to
like,
bring everybody down.
No, I feel like this is an intervention right now. I'm so sorry.
So I don't know what to do. On one hand, I got this new sofa that I paid so much money for, and on the other hand, I've got 40 balls.
Your sofa is the equivalent of Starrcade 97. You were so excited to have it, you paid money for it, and then when you got it, you realized that.
Thank you, Kyle. That's exactly where I was going with this.
Everything.
It's like you know my heart.
Well, I know your balls, and the rest of everybody listening right now does too. I'm so sorry.
Starrcade 97 main event.
Starrcade 97 main event. Here we go. Here's how it starts, man. Michael Buffer in the ring. Everything is fine. Hulk Hogan comes out playing the big gold belt electric guitar. Everything is sweet with that. And then Sting hits. And I think I was expecting a little bit more of a grandiose entrance from Sting. He didn't really come from the rafters. He walked out of the entrance. Maybe that was an idea that they had on purpose.
Very solemnly, too, might I add.
Very solemnly.
There's no pyro or anything.
No.
He just kind of walks out. There's a video playing on the screens.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking he's gonna come in for the crowd. They come in from the rafters.
They did have the lasers. There was the cool laser show because it was the fucking 90s.
Absolutely.
Of Sting. And then there was this little boy that reads this soliloquy off and all that happens. And then Sting just very solemnly walks out.
I've seen better entrances on reruns of Dharma and Greg.
Right. Wow. Dharma and Greg. I
don't know why that was the one I went to.
I don't know. Hey, that's, a lot of people.
They used to do it all the time on Married with Children. Every time Kelly would walk in.
Woo!
Yeah.
I think that sitcoms are sadly missing that these days.
They really are, man.
Or like whenever somebody would kiss, you'd hear the woo.
Exactly.
We should do that on this show for when we inevitably kiss.
For 40 balls.
6 seasons in.
40 balls.
So Sting comes out. Now, here's the issue with the match. Here's how it was supposed to go down because we're quickly reaching an hour here. Let's try to wrap this up in about 9 minutes, which is about usually 9 times longer than I need to wrap things up.
Yeah.
So Sting, here's how the match was supposed to go down. Sting loses to Hogan after Hogan hits the big boot.
Yeah.
Nick Patrick, who was the referee of this match, was supposed to go 1, 2, 3.
Right.
At which point Bret Hart incensed that a Montreal Screwjob-esque finish would happen a second time.
And he was having none of that shit.
Would have none of that shit. He stops the timekeeper from ringing the bell. Again, this is how it was supposed to have gone down. He restarts the match. Sting beats Hogan very quickly.
2 stinger splashes later.
2 stinger splashes and a scorpion death lock later. Sting is the triumphant champion.
Now, let me tell you something that really made me laugh, and I don't know if this was just me or not. You got the count, okay? Hogan hits the big boot.
Oh, yeah.
The leg drop.
We're going to get to that.
Finished 1,017 matches previously with the exact same string of moves. He hits the boot, hits the leg drop, and then here comes the count, the slow count. And
the fast count.
Slow, the fast count.
Right.
In quotations. 1, 2, 3. Regular. There wasn't even.
Oh, no.
Okay, and here's the great part: is that Bret Hart had nowhere to go with this. Because he's supposed to come out and grab the hammer from the guy ringing the bell, the timekeeper.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to say, he goes like this to indicate. He said it was a fast count.
Yeah.
Only problem was there was no fast count to be had.
No, and we're going to get to that in just 1 second, but I want to talk about the match really quickly first. What a lot of people thought was going to happen was that Sting was going to beat Hogan pillar to post, almost as if going back to Bruno Sammartino beating the shit out of Zbyszko, where Zbyszko got no offense in Shea Stadium in the steel cage. That did not happen one bit. The match starts off. Sting gets a shine in for maybe 60 seconds.
And Hogan took the heat like the meat of the match.
Hogan took the heat as if he was wrestling any other match.
Yeah.
This was not any other match, but you know what? It's fine. Maybe in their mind, all these fans paid all this money. They wanted to see a match. Instead of a beatdown, they wanted to see a match. I can understand that.
Right.
Now, I want to get to the bottom of who exactly had the idea to do this. Well, not who had the idea, of who really screwed Sting over. Eric Bischoff, I have read his autobiography multiple times because it's so good. Controversy creates cash. It's really good. And in his book, he defends the decision to screw over Sting. Well, not to screw over Sting, but to have this shit finished, because he said Sting showed up looking like he hadn't seen a tanning bed or a gym in weeks. I understand why both Hogan and Bischoff would be upset about this. I get it, because this is a big match. You haven't wrestled a match in a year and a half. The least you can do is lift some weights.
You're looking a little mushy, Steve.
Right. Look presentable.
Right.
That being said, you don't make that call that night, right? I mean,
this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, and this may be founded or it may be unfounded. I'm thinking that Bischoff wanted his own version of the Montreal Screwjob. I don't think he made that decision on the spot, Kyle. I think he wanted the controversy. I mean, he's a guy who prided himself on being surrounded by controversy, and I think he wanted his own version of the Montreal Screwjob in this thing.
Maybe. I mean, that could have been the case, and WCW with Russo would try to recreate the Montreal Screwjob on numerous occasions later on. It did not work.
Actually, that's Russo's motto. If it works somewhere else, do it here.
A million times, no matter how many times it refuses to work again.
Right.
So Hogan, I'm losing my mind here. Hogan hits the big boot, right? And before automatically and this is what made the ending so shitty, was that Hogan hits the big boot. He poses for 45 minutes after he hits the big boot. He then hits the leg drop. And then 1, 2, 3. Now, again, as we said, this was where Nick Patrick, who was the referee, was supposed to have hit the fast count. He did not. Eric Bischoff, and again, this is why it's so murky for me. Eric Bischoff claims that he did not tell Nick Patrick to count slowly. And he even says that Nick Patrick didn't make the slow count on purpose in his book, because if he did, he would have fired him right there on the spot. So I asked Sting. Sting actually was on the morning show that we have here at Z-Rock 103 in Lexington years ago. And this is like 2010. It's a very topical question at that point, but I always wondered, because I could never figure out who screwed Sting
have him on
over.
The show, take advantage of it.
I asked him, I said, did Hogan backdoor you on that? And he thought I talked about sweet love making, and he said, yes. No. Sting, to this day, claims that he did not think that Hogan told Nick Patrick to make the count slowly.
That's exactly what I thought happened. I mean, if I had to put my money on it, I would say that Hogan had a big hand in that. And I got to give it to Hogan, which I never do, because I can't stand him, and not because he's a heel,
right?
Because he's a man who's seemingly just taken from the business for 30 years and doesn't really give a lot back.
You're right.
He averages about 4 bumps a match, and I got to give it to him. I think he had 6. I think he took 6 in this
He really
match.
might have. I would love to go back and actually count the number of bumps
and
that
his
Hogan
left
took.
foot actually left the ground for half of them. So
really?
You really got to give it to him.
That's amazing. So in recent interviews, Nick Patrick has also said that he said the reason that he made the count the way he did was because some people were telling him to make the count slowly, some were telling him to make the count quickly, and that's why he tried to give a count that was right down the middle, which, to be fair, I can sort of see how the cadence was a little off, but it certainly wasn't quick, but it really wasn't slow. And so at that point, the announcers, to their credit, could have stayed to the script and said, "Oh, that's BS. Nick Patrick hit the count quickly," but they didn't.
That would be foolish.
Instead, they acted confused, like, what? And
which is really the only response that they could have believably went with.
You're right. And when Bret Hart is arguing to Nick Patrick, he's saying, "Oh, you made the count too quick." Well, Nick Patrick comes off looking like a great guy, and Bret Hart comes off looking like
a heel.
A heel or a psycho or an asshole, because Nick Patrick even says, and I quote, "No, sir, I did not count like that." And he was telling the truth.
Yeah, he really was.
He was telling the truth.
And it's funny because it put Bret in kind of a weird, auspicious kind of situation, because, what's Bret going to turn around and go, "No, the count was exactly what it should have been."
Right. So then Bret Hart knocks out Nick Patrick.
Because why not?
He restarts the match, and then Sting wins.
For no reason.
And as a crowd member, you're going, "What? Hogan won."
What the hell?
Hogan won, like, right down the middle. Big boot, leg drop, modest 3 count. He won, but instead, so this pay-per-view, this storyline that took a year and a half to get to is now moot because it looks like Sting is a sore loser. Hogan should be the champion. Bret Hart is a psycho asshole, and everything is shit. All because, and I believe Hogan didn't want to do the job clean.
If you had to pin it on someone, Kyle, is that who you would pin it on?
I would pin it on Hogan. I would honestly
in your humble opinion, I mean, if you had to say who was behind this damn train wreck, and I don't mean like who wrote this angle, who was in charge. I mean, who you really think who kind of set the wheels in motion? What was the catalyst of the whole thing was the count or the lack of fast count there.
Yeah,
I got to say that Hogan was behind it because I mean. Hogan, you got to believe, and not from a wrestling angle standpoint, but from a real life standpoint, wants everybody but him to look worse than him.
Oh no, there's no doubt about that. Especially in '97, I would think that it would have to be Hogan. I would think that Hogan was behind the whole deal, and
he got in his ear about it.
I think he got in Nick Patrick's ear, and Nick Patrick didn't know what to do because Hogan had so much power in the company, and Bischoff did too, and he didn't want to fuck anybody over, but he also wanted to keep his job, so he did what he had to do.
Right.
I don't think that. No, I mean now, and what's so shitty about that is that rather than having Sting win and then he goes on to defend the title for a number of months, which is what they obviously should have done, they addressed the controversy the next night on Nitro, and they had a rematch. It was Hogan versus Sting, this time for real. Yeah. But the end of this Nitro, it cuts off early, so you don't see the end of the match.
Yeah.
So then...
Perfect ending.
Yeah, so the next week on Nitro, they say... the lawyers are involved in this. NWO's lawyers are not allowing us to show you what happened. But, fans, we are going to show you what happened last week on Nitro this Thursday on the first episode of Thunder. And they show it, but then multiple referees are involved in that match. So because of that, they strip Sting of the title. He finally wins the title in February at Super Brawl, but by that point, it was too late. I mean, the bloom was off the rose. Sting wasn't special anymore. And that was, I think, in a nutshell.
I think you've exhausted the audience at that point. You've insulted their intelligence, and you've basically just exhausted them. You can only feed them so much shit before they just start going, who cares?
Exactly.
They're
no,
still
you're
trying
right.
to sell us on this.
You're absolutely right about that, man. And that's what happened. And again, I mentioned WrestleMania 14 at the beginning of this podcast. You look in contrast to WrestleMania 14, the WWF's biggest show, which happened only a few months later and was one of the biggest things that turned the tide for WWF, was that main event was Stone Cold versus Shawn Michaels. Stone Cold wins his first world title. Shawn Michaels, who just like Hogan was a man who did not enjoy losing, who had a ton of attitude problems, does the right thing because McMahon told him to do the right thing. That's, because again,
kind of the Jiminy Cricket on his shoulder.
Absolutely. Shawn Michaels, unlike Hogan, did not have the creative control clause in his contract. He had to do what his boss told him, and he goes down in the middle of the ring after a stunner 1, 2, 3, Stone Cold wins. So what have you told the fans? And by the way, there's a million different ways that we can contrast WrestleMania 14 and Starrcade 97. WrestleMania 14 was a great show top to bottom. It had spectacular video packages, which WCW was not doing at the time. Right. The atmosphere that it generated was a million times better than Starrcade 97. Sure. But you're essentially telling the fans in WCW, it doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter the way the story should go. We are going to do whatever suits us and the egos of the players involved.
Absolutely. But
the WWF at the time said, no, we're going to do, and I hate to use this term, but we're going to do what's best for business, right? So the babyface will go over when he should. The stories will end.
Which you don't get a lot from Vince McMahon. You don't seem to get a whole lot of what's best for business.
Well, ironically enough, you don't get that anymore.
You don't really get it in wrestling. Period. You never really got it in wrestling. There's never no real finite time in wrestling history when there was a whole lot of let's do what's best for business. I mean,
you're right.
You saw shining examples of it here and there.
Oh God, I mean, and again, I mean, there's so many different things that we could talk about. Starrcade '97, Bret Hart, for example, they blew their load with Bret Hart. I mean, Bret Hart was the hottest thing in the wrestling business coming out of the Montreal screw job.
Absolutely, and being a free agent and jumping ship.
And how did they debut him? How did they capitalize?
they waved at it with their collective dicks. To
Co-
quote
Yes.
Kyle, they
Yes.
waved at it with their collective dicks as it passed by.
Yeah, they made him a referee.
One of a million opportunities that they just said, "Oh, we'll see you later."
Wouldn't it have been great if that was Bret Hart's gimmick after Starrcade 97 was that he was a psycho who always saw the wrong thing? You know what I mean?
It couldn't have been any worse than what WCW was doing at the time.
No.
I don't think it could have been any worse.
Or what they did with him, which was nothing. In 2 years, they did nothing.
You sit back there, if they would have ran with that, you just sit back and watched it going, hey, Bret Hart's lost his damn mind, but it's entertaining. I mean,
Yeah.
it's worth tuning in every week, I guess.
Well, it was one of the very few reasons anybody would tune in. So that was the first nail of the coffin in WCW, and there will be many more, which we will get to on many future podcasts. I think we're going to wrap the thing up right here, Jeremy.
I think we call it a day, man. I think we really touched it was a really good episode, I thought.
I think
we really
it was.
touched on some important things. And anytime you talk about WCW, and they just hand you the ammunition to beat them to death.
They do. I mean, kind of like the old WWE YouTube show. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Hashtag WCW ruins everything. They did.
That's
And
a perfect way to end the show, I think.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you guys so much. And again, really quickly before we get off here, like us on Facebook. Please tell your friends. Share this on Facebook. Do anything you can, man. We're two guys who love talking wrestling, and we would love to grow this thing, get more listeners, and hopefully make some cash eventually off of it.
Absolutely. And I'm Jeremy, and for Kyle here, I'm going to go ahead and say, Hulk Hogan, you can't do that.
Very nice.